All right, guys, we're almost done with this edition of the Screen Team as we are doing James Bond flicks for you. We've got our big James Bond expert on the show. We've got Jake with us, and we've already previously on a preview show, we've done Sean Connery, we've done Daniel Craig, we have done Timothy Dalton, we've done Roger Moore, we've done Lansbury, but finally we've got... What's his face?
What's his face? Pierce Brosnan.
Exactly.
And his first entry into the Bond as Bond.
Right. So, what are your thoughts on Mr. Bronson? Are you a fan of him as James Bond?
In this movie, yes. In Goldeneye, in Tomorrow Never Dies, which Bond fans give that one a lot of hate, just because they it was just kind of a color by numbers kind of Bond movie. But I really liked that one because it kind of returned back to older style of Bond movies where it's less of a huge plot. I don't know. I just really like that one.
Sure.
But Brosnan, I think he did really well, except for...
What about the one with Denise Richards in it?
The World Is Not Enough. That one gets a lot of hate too, but I like that one too. But
you don't like that?
I think it's the George Lucas made Star Wars for 12-year-olds effect.
Yeah.
I was a lot younger when those movies were coming out, and that's why I really enjoy them still to this day. Still, the latter two Pierce Brosnan movies were probably the weaker two of his.
So which one's the weakest? The Halle Berry one?
Probably.
Okay.
That one opens up really strong. You've got this awesome chase scene in North Korea, stuff blowing up, and then it just kind of slides downhill once the plot builds after that.
Well, let's start with the first one that Brosnan did, Goldeneye.
Yes.
And this one's good. It's
good.
Really, really good.
It is really good. Probably the best Pierce Brosnan did was his first entry as Bond.
So what do we think about the opening scene? The opening scene is pretty fun. What do you think about it?
Oh, it's all kinds of fun. You've got your classic espionage, and they did really well. Of course, they did this really well with bringing a new Bond in. Mm-hmm. They don't really show his face until about 5 minutes into the movie.
Sure.
I mean, you see this figure in black in a black jumpsuit running along this big dam.
Yeah.
And then you see him bungee jump down.
Which was awesome. That was a great stunt.
And he does like a grappling hook and tows him way down to this weapons facility we find out with, and breaks in through the bathroom, which is awesome. Not something you'd expect James Bond to do. So
Right.
It's and that's kind of where you first get your introduction. He's hanging upside down. He's I can't remember what he said. He had a classic Bond quippy line as he dropped, and this guy sitting on the toilet drops his newspaper, and he's like, "Oh, punched by Bond." So, yeah, this is a great Bond movie. It has got everything you need. It's got the big action set pieces. It's got a great plot, a good world in jeopardy plot, as most Bonds should have.
Sure.
And, really enjoyable.
So, a lot of you had mentioned the plot, and some plots get a little bit confusing. Like when you watch, for me, Quantum of Solace, that plot was it was just like, what's going on? So with this one, I know you said it's kind of easy to follow, but to me, there was still a little bit elements where you're like, hey, what's going on? But you still kind of understand, all right, I might not fully understand what you're saying, but I know that the world's going to die if this GoldenEye satellite happens to go off, right?
Yeah, and then the basic plot line is a couple Russian general. I think I can't remember the character's name. Almatov general. Anyway, him and another agent, another Russian agent, Xenia Onatop, one of those on the nose Bond girl names.
Played by Famke Janssen, who this made her a star.
It did, and they go and they hijack this helicopter. That's the first kind of plot line.
Yeah,
is they hijack this helicopter that can withstand electromagnetic pulse, which is just like a nuclear weapon detonated up in space, and it kills electrical circuits. And they steal the helicopter to go steal the Goldeneye weapon at this base in Siberia.
Yeah,
like out in the middle of nowhere in Siberia. So they run in, they steal the access disc so they can fire the weapons, and that's kind of where the plot takes off. That's the whole thing. Bond's got to locate the weapon, eliminate the weapon, and find out who was behind it.
And we find out who was behind it. I don't know if we want to say or not, even though the movie's like 30 years old.
I think it might be safe.
It's definitely a surprise who the villain is.
It is. It's and you meet the villain at the very beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Without knowing he's the villain.
I know, which is cool.
Which is really, really cool. Actually, you meet most of the main three characters: the general, the Russian general, and Bond, and then you've got your guy who turns out to be the main bad guy of the movie, all within like the first 20 minutes of the movie.
So do they do that a lot in James Bond movies with those opening scenes? Like, I thought usually the opening scenes, James Bond is facing somebody, he beats them, and then we go off and we find our main villain. Usually,
I think they call them opening gambits, but usually like the opening gambit is dislocated to the story. Sometimes it's tied in.
Sure.
In a lot of them, especially in the Connery era, they were just separate things altogether.
Gotcha. I have a hard time distinguishing this movie and the Nintendo 64 game.
Oh, yeah.
They are both very, very great, but is one better than the other?
I don't think so. I mean, in their perspective, like if you want to sit down and watch a Bond movie, watch the movie. But if you want to experience that Bond movie through a great video game, play the video game, because it hits the story beats. It kind of adds some different story beats in a little bit in different places, just because the way video games had to be made in '96.
Yeah,
it was one of the first games on the Nintendo 64 and really rocketed that console.
It did. It was such a good game, man.
Really, really good game. One of my favorites, and made like almost every game's a shooter game now because of Goldeneye, the video game.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy for a licensed game to have that much impact on video games as a whole.
Yeah. What do you think about Brosnan? Where is he in your hierarchy of James Bonds?
Okay, that's a bit of a tough one because you kind of got me on the spot, but. I always put Connery up top, and he was just the original Bond. The Bond swagger all kind of came from Connery. He threw a lot more in than Ian Fleming threw in the books for the character and made him a lot more. Bond was always kind of cocky and very sure of himself and always was a little bit quippy, but Connery took it to another level, and I think Lazenby's performance, although his performance was great in its own right, it was a little more subdued. And just his background, if you haven't watched the Becoming 007 documentary on Amazon Prime or Hulu, or I think it's on Hulu. I think that's a Hulu exclusive. Definitely watch that because his story of becoming Bond was really cool. And I'd put Brosnan right there under Connery. I even put Daniel Craig probably third.
Wow.
I would put Roger Moore, which a lot of people associate most with Bond because he was in 7 movies.
Sure.
I'll put him above Lazenby just because of his legacy of Bond.
Sure.
A lot of the great Bond movies and gadgets and things like that. A lot of the what people became to know James Bond as came from
the pop culture James Bond.
The Roger Moore James Bond. And he was a lot more just cheeky English fellow Bond, and he got down to business when he had to.
Sure. So does that mean Timothy Dalton pulls up the rear?
I don't know. That's hard to say. I almost
go ahead, say it. If you don't say it, I will.
I don't know.
He's not going to say it. I will.
I'll put Dalton above Lazenby though. Even though as much as I like Lazenby, I think I'll put Dalton above Lazenby.
All right.
Dalton's the most underrated Bond. Pierce Brosnan was actually supposed to be Bond. In the Dalton era. The Living Daylights, the first one Dalton was in. Yeah. That was actually supposed to be Pierce Brosnan in that movie.
I think it all kind of worked out, don't you think?
I think it did too. I think people got more Remington Steele, and then we got a couple underrated Bond movies in the late 80s with Dalton.
Yeah.
And then in 95, you had a bit of a gap there for Bond. You had a gap before, and that kind of happened again with the Die Another Day to Casino Royale. You had about a 3-4 year gap there.
We need time to
change Bonds.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think Brosnan did really well, especially he was the Bond of the 90s and early 2000s.
All right, there you go.
Maybe more the Bond of the late 90s.
This is our James Bond exclusive for you with Jake and right here on the Screen Team. Movie's called Goldeneye. We've got more reviews coming your way next Saturday at 6 p.m. for Jake and Chris. We are the Screen Team, and we want you to know before you go.